All right, well, I'm sure Mr. Guzman will be here in a moment, but let's go ahead and we'll call the City of Homestead Ad Hoc Charter Review Committee meeting to order. It's Thursday, June 4th, and it is 5:31 p.m. Due to COVID-19, this will be a virtual Ad Hoc Charter Committee meeting. The city will be accepting public comments as part of the meeting, which can be emailed to public comments at cityofhomestead.com. Public comments will be made part of the record and included in the minutes. Public comments can be submitted 24 hours prior to the Ad Hoc Charter Review Committee meeting, and comments are limited to 300 words per comment, and those submitting comments should provide their name and address for the record. All right, so let's have the record reflect that the only member not present at this point is Julio Guzman. Oh, he's here. So we're all here now. Is Julio here?
Yeah, I'm here now.
Very good. Okay, I see the J on the screen now. All right, there we go. So Elvis is online. Okay.
I'm here.
Mr. Moz and I are here in the council chambers in person, and everyone else is here virtually. We have before us the minutes of our previous meeting on May 26, 2020. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? We have a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll move it.
Moved by Committee Member Maldonado. Do we have a second for the minutes? Second by Mr. Moss. Would anyone wish to be reflected as a no vote on the motion to approve? None appearing. The minutes of our previous meeting are hereby approved unanimously. Our first topic today is finishing
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Craig?
I'd like to ask a quick question before we get started. Upon reviewing the extensive research material we received, I noticed that when you chaired the Charter Review Committee in February 2002, there were 15 members on that committee. And I was curious on your reflection of whether, given the composition of our current committee of 7 members, whether 7 members are more efficient and perhaps more manageable, or are 15 members preferable for a wider variety and a better cross-section of opinions?
Well, the 2002 committee was appointed, and the parameters were established by then Mayor Roscoe Warren. He had 3 appointments, and each council member had 2 appointments, and I was designated as the chair. Typically, the subsequent committees have been 1 appointment per council member, and bear in mind that the 2002 committee work was just very comprehensive and very encompassing. It was the first real major overhaul of the charter since it had been adopted in 1963. So we could have done a broader view this time, or done it the way we did it. I can only speak to what my feelings were as to why Mayor Warren at that time wanted a larger composition of the board. From where I sit on this board, I think we've had a pretty encompassing and diverse conversation on all of these topics.
Mr. Maas, do you agree with that?
Yes.
Having experienced both members of committee members.
Yes. What I remember from that first committee was that sometimes it got a little bit difficult to deal with so many members, and the meetings just went on and on. There were times when we would last for hours at a time. So I think it's a little more manageable this way, in my opinion.
I would agree with that angle. I would agree
There's
with
an
that
old
angle as
DC
well.
adage- There's
Go
an old DC adage that says, "What's a camel? It's a dog designed by a committee."
Okay, that's true too. If you didn't catch that, he said a committee that is supposed to design a dog, and you get a camel. But bear in mind that we anticipate having extensive public comment, and certainly council will review these proposals. So it's not as if this small group of 7 plus your chairman are going to mandate what goes on a ballot for the public to address.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anything further before we go back to finish up our discussions on the resign to run provisions? And as I recall, conceptually, we had approved the philosophy that if a sitting member of council were going to resign to run for mayor, or even a mayor resigning to run for a council seat, that there needed to be a sufficient period of time such that, in fairness to the public and in the interest of best use of our electoral assets, would be to create a time period such that that vacancy created by the resignation would be filled as a result of that upcoming election, rather than by, all things being equal, a subsequent appointment process or special election. And the issue that remained open was, we had asked I think the clerk and the attorney were going to make some inquiry as to what the timeframes, reasonable timeframes in order to meet the requirements of the Miami-Dade Supervisor of Elections, in order to have that extra seat put on the ballot for the regular election. Did you, Madam Clerk, are you the one who obtained the information?
Mr. Mayor, I spoke with the Elections Department, and I was informed that that seat would be considered a special election. It would have to piggyback off of the regular election. They'll put everything on one ballot, but it will be 2 separate elections.
Right, I understand that.
Okay.
And a time
So-
frame would be
30 days, at least 30 days.
at least 30
They
days.
recommended 35, but at least
Right.
30 days.
So then conceptually, if we backed the requirement to resign up to not later than 30 days prior to the first day to qualify, then that would meet that 35-day window to build in the 5 days of cushion, correct?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Just to revisit, so the discussion would be then to craft a charter amendment that provides that if you are a council member at a point in your term and you decide to resign to run for mayor, in order to be qualified, you must submit your resignation not less than 30 days prior to the first day of qualifying to run for office. So I'll open the floor for any questions or comments. And again, at our last meeting, we had approved the concept. It was a matter of inserting the minimum number of days to meet the Supervisor of Elections timeframe, so that it didn't have to be a separate election. I mean, it will be deemed a special election, but it will be piggybacked on our regular.
She said the name would be City of Homestead, if it's the general election and special election. That's how they will name that election.
Okay,
Okay?
very good. So do we have a motion to insert the period of not later than 30 days prior to the first day to qualify to run?
So moved.
Is that you, Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so it's been moved by Mr. Craig. Do we have a second?
Second.
I think I heard a second from Ms. Mallory. Is there any further discussion on this matter? All right. Would anyone wish to be recorded as a no vote on this provision that requires a sitting mayor or council member to resign not less than 30 days prior to the first day to qualify to run for office in order to be qualified to run for a different seat? And that would work in both directions, mayor to council, council to mayor. No vote. There are no indications of opposition, so we'll have the record reflect that this matter passed unanimously. The second issue we wanted to address, and I think Mr. Craig picked up on this from the minutes of our 2002 meeting, was the issue of consecutive years or limitation of maximum number of service. And I'll ask Matt to jump in here so I don't get too far out in the weeds and create some confusion or misspeak. Right now, we have a 12-year term limit on council and an 8-year limit on mayor. And the charter is written in such a fashion that if you serve your entire 12 years, you must stay out for 2 before you're eligible to run for mayor, and vice versa. If you serve your entire 8-year term as mayor, you're precluded for 2 years from coming back and running for a council seat. And at this point, there is no lifetime limit on service. Clearly there'd be break-in service, but there's no, let's say, 20-year limitation. You could conceivably serve 12 years as a council member, lay out a couple of years, come back and serve 8 years as mayor, and then stay out again and go back as either mayor or councilman. We don't have a cap. And as an aside, you may have picked up in those minutes from 2002 that we had discussed a total 20-year cap, and that never made it beyond the committee. It was never before the council for consideration. But the issue I want to raise is that it leaves the door, as the charter is currently written and how it's termed, it leaves open the possibility of what I've called, in a conversation with the attorneys, form over substance. That a council member who was coming up on his or her term limit could resign from office at the end of their term to not reach the 12 years when they effectively have, when they're on the eve of reaching that limit, and then run for mayor without that 2-year break in service. And I guess to start the conversation, I'd like to hear what the thoughts are on, should there be, clearly there's a provision for a break-in service if you've filled out, the years of let's say, council member. But the question is, consecutive years. The minutes from 2002 are really all over the place. There were seemingly 19 different opinions. And the question for me basically is do we want to prevent that issue, or are we just going to let it go forward? Should there be more clarity as to whether that last-minute resignation would be sufficient to allow someone to move from council to potentially the mayor's seat?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Craig.
Well, on principle, I'm opposed to term limits because I think that's what elections are for. But again, referring to the 2002 committee, I noticed that there was a motion by Mr. Moss moved and seconded by Mr. Trantham that a person should serve no more than 12 years in continuous service. There were 10 yes votes on that, and you were the only no vote. And I'd like to understand your thinking about that at that time, and if you've changed your opinion.
I'd have to go back and look directly at that as to what the conversation was. And I know if you look later in those minutes, the conversation by Mr. Moss seemed to go one way, and then he voted against what was passed as well. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that the minutes really reflect what happened and what the intention was. I mean, we have Mr. Weiss, our city attorney, clearly making a statement, seemingly making a statement that it would require some break-in service and not being able to jump from council to mayor or serve more than 12 years at a time. But that doesn't seem to be what made the ballot or what the motion actually ended up being. That was, as you can imagine, Mr. Craig, I think you remember the old conference room or the conference room at the old city hall, that huge table was packed, and there was a lot of conversation and very difficult logic and rationale to keep up with. So, you know, as an academic exercise, at some point in time, I'd love to sit down with you and go back through these minutes and see if we can recreate where we were coming from on that. And I'm throwing it out now for, as things exist, are we comfortable leaving things such that someone can effectively serve for up to 20 years without something other than a token break-in service by resignation upon qualification? Or at this point, it would be, you know, if the other issue that we just addressed passed, resignation 60 days before an election, 60 to 90 days before election.
Thank you. Well, I think no matter how we phrase it, there must be a break. I see the scenario that you've laid out, and I think that we should, in some way, address that scenario and make sure it doesn't happen.
Well, I agree. And clearly, there is a 12-year limitation in the charter for council. And the charter clearly says if you serve your 12 years, you can't roll over into mayor without a 2-year break-in service. But it's expressed in years rather than term. And I guess, again, the question comes back to, is that really what was intended, or what we would like to see going forward, such that someone can effectively serve more than 12 years without a 2-year break in service?
Matthew?
Go ahead. I think I had two of you trying to speak at once.
I guess we're waiting on Matthew to answer Mr. Craig.
No, my question was addressed to Mr. Pearl, and relying on Matthew's experience and expertise, is there some language that could be devised that would prevent the scenario that the mayor has described? Somebody resigning just before the end of term and then immediately getting elected and therefore getting around the 12-year limit.
Yeah, I think that we could craft something. I think that the discussion, if that's where we want to go, is defining the time frame under which somebody has to resign in order for it not to be construed as 12 years of consecutive service, whether it be a year before, and not just resignation, but if they're forced out of office for any reason, really. Do we want it to be a year prior, 2 years prior, or like a full election cycle? but we can craft language by identifying the time frame within which someone would need to resign in order to be eligible for the next election.
Two years.
Well, for example, and full disclosure here, I had this conversation earlier with the attorney. And again, this is just one solution, and I'm sure there are potentially many others. And off the top of my head, I had discussed with him about a provision that may say that if you I think this would solve the problem, that if you resign within a year of the qualifying period, the beginning of the qualifying period, just prior to the end of your maximum term, then you would be deemed to have filled out the term for term limit purposes. So, for example, if I were sitting on council and coming up on 12 years in November of, well, qualifying in August of 21, and let's say I was going to be, well, let's use Steve Shelley. Let's use a real world example. Steve Shelley will reach his term limit at the end of his term in November of 21. Under my example, that in order to be qualified to run for mayor in 21, he would need to resign no later than whatever that date is in August of 20. That he would have been out of the seat, in my example, just as an example for talking purposes, for 1 year at the time he qualified to run for mayor. Or conversely, that if he didn't resign by that date in August, he would be deemed to have finished his term for term limit purposes. So then, therefore he would be precluded from jumping into the mayor's race. Does everybody understand the example? Maybe I can restate it a little better.
No, I understood and we're starting to hammer down on a specific language that we can adopt as long as all of the other colleagues are the same. What I wanted to say is I definitely do not want to keep the vague language that is currently in the charter now. I want to remove all vague language and get specifics in there. So hopefully we can get through that today.
Again, I would defer to Matt. Matt, I haven't seen language that is deemed to have completed his term. Is that acceptable to you?
Well, no, I'll play with the language. We'll make it more declaratory. The resignation will need to take place, as in the mayor's example. Sorry, I have an echo from the council chamber. Will need to have taken place by X date in order to be eligible to run for mayor. Not to throw an additional wrinkle into this, but one point that you might want to consider, if you set the date from the close of his term, a year from his close of his term, then you may be able to fill with appointments if we go for inside a year, whereas if it's outside of the year, you'll be holding a special election. And I'm not trying to drive the conversation one way or the other, just something to be cognizant of. The timing of this resignation will dictate whether or not a special election needs to be held to fill the remaining term, year and a few months of that council member seat.
Matt, that's a good point then. So I'm wondering if it would be more economical to create the provision that once you reach the midpoint of your last term, that for term limit purposes and qualifying to run for either mayor or council, you are deemed to have filled out your entire limit, rather than putting it in terms of you have to resign. I mean, it would cause a resignation earlier if someone wanted to jump into another seat, but then we've got 2 years and we've already got the potential for special election in place. And it's a matter of which angle of attack creates the fewest number of other issues we will have to address.
Mayor?
Yes.
So the question I have is, if I want to, so let's say we'll use Shirley's example. We're coming up to November of 2020. He turns out 2021 of November. You know, when you say, you know, there is the states resigned to run, and my understanding of that is that, and I could use the example of Daniela Calvo right now, right, where she's running for the mayor of Miami-Dade County. She's she's running for mayor of Miami-Dade County. She's a commissioner. She submitted her paperwork to resign to run, but technically she'll still be into the seat until right prior to November. Am I correct in that, Matt?
Yes.
So you know, she'll be there, and so is that going to be the same scenario for us, or is it that the minute that you decide to run, let's say, so if I say a year before that I want to run for mayor, when I submit my resign to run, is it the resigning effective immediately, or is it like that where you kind of hold your spot? So
Well,
help me.
let me jump in here real quick. I think Councilman Maldonado, we're mixing concepts there. You've got the state resigned to run law that if you time your resignation properly, you have the right to remain in your seat far beyond the date that you submit that letter. I think the issue we are trying to address is, in plain terms, your seat not being in the seat, physically not being in the seat for a period of time prior to which you're trying to, and you know, most often it's going to be from council to mayor, that would violate potentially that 12-year maximum. That's what we're trying to address. I mean, clearly the state resigned to run law is a whole different set of issues. Mr. Porter did the same thing. He issued a resignation months and months prior to the day he had to leave the seat. And again, what I think the conversation should be focused on is your absence, your physical absence from the seat on the eve of reaching your term limit before you seek another seat, which would, you know, potentially trigger another set of term limits.
Well, I'll chime in real quick and just say, you know, what my thought was in regards to this. So what I would have liked, I mean, so if you wanted to, my position, if I was an elected official, I'm a councilman, and I want to run for the mayor's seat, I'm in my last year, you know, if we said, my thought was like, as long as it's defined, and I like the definition that we started with, which was, you know, that I would, if I submitted my 30 days prior to qualifying, if I decided that I wanted to run, I would do that there, right? And you know, and be able to run. Now, obviously, because of the time from qualifying date till the end of that election cycle, which is in November, you're looking at what, like 6 months or something like that. And so, you know, if you know, so there's a person, I would assume then the person would still stay in the seat and you know, do the campaign run and I guess things work out. Or does the person at that point, is that the cutoff point where he has to then at that point resign right away? But if he resigns right away, then it leaves that void of under 6 months or under a year, and you know, triggers other decisions. So I know we have to work through some things because one decision, you know, has an effect on another. So I know we're trying to get to that. So, but I'm okay if. I guess I'm okay if we did a year before and we said, okay, if I wanted to run, you know, if you want to run for mayor that year, if you know that you're going to term out, if you want to run, if you resign a whole year before that, which would be November, right? If you do, yeah, it would be November from the year before you term out. I guess I would be okay with that as well, if that's the thought process here. So anyways, I just kind of wanted to get on the mic and just shoot at least some of my thoughts and continue to hear the conversation.
Okay. So, and you're breaking up a little bit and the sound's not great today. I don't know how it is on your end. Bo, just to be clear, just to be clear, Councilman, you're okay with the year thing? Is that what I got out of what you said?
Yeah, I could be okay with that. I mean, I'm on the fence on it. You know, I initially thought that it would be, if there was one thing I wanted, it was just a definition of or to be clear about what Mr. Guzman just mentioned. You know, we want to be, we don't want to be vague. We want to be, you know, specific and sure. And so I just wanted at least a time frame for us to know when is that last moment that we can make a decision to run for mayor? Because again, I think just recently, I'm going to assume, if I heard correctly through the grapevine, that you know, Councilman Burgess was obviously going to term out, and I'm sure he thought about running for mayor. And you know, because the language is vague, you know, he was and he worked on it a little bit too late. I think that he never was able to get the answer that he wanted. And so, you know, I really wanted to work on at least answering that question and remove the vagueness of it, where, you know, we have a defined time of when, you know, what is that cutoff time that allow us to run into that mayoral race?
Well, and I think my concerns are in line with yours. That was there really an intention that you served no more than 12 years, then you have to sit out for 2 years, or do we have a loophole right now that says, and let's use John as the example or Steve Shelley as the example, that as your term limited out, if you show up on the first day to qualify, or 10 days out, or whatever, or, you know, as resigned to run wouldn't be an issue for them. For somebody who's going to be termed out, resigned to run is not an issue. So all they would need to do would be to show up, you know, on the last day of qualifying, submit their resignation, and file to run for mayor. So in effect, they would only be out of office. The longest possible time would be from sometime the last week of August till the first Tuesday of November. So really 60 to 70 days at most, which in my mind, and having sat through those meetings, and I hope Mr. Moss can weigh in as well, that's not really what was intended when we enacted the 12-year limit on council and the 8-year limit on mayor. And I think that as things stand now, there is that potential that you can have a, for lack of better expression, a sham resignation, a temporary resignation to jump from almost meeting your term limit to being able to do another 8 years if you're lucky enough to be elected as mayor. You know, and the question is, are we going to back that up a year from qualifying? Are we going to do nothing? Are we going to back it up to a year from qualifying? Or even under the thought that once you cross that midway point in your last term, if you don't do something, are you precluded from then moving to another seat? Mr. Moss?
Mr. Moss?
Let John jump in, if you would, Mr. Moss.
If I may, what I recall was that the intention of the majority of the council, the committee back
We
then,
can't hear him.
was to,
Can't hear.
Can't hear him.
Yeah, it's on.
okay. If I recall properly, the consensus of the majority of the committee back then was that the 12-year limit was to be a hard limit, and then if you were to run for council again or run for mayor or anything like that, you would have to take a 2-year hiatus, and then you could come back in and you would have your 12 years again if you wanted to. But I remember the 12-year to be hard. And if we go back, if we actually pass the 4-year for mayor now, that could actually potentially give somebody 15 years on the council if they do 11 and then resign for a year. I think you said 11, right? And then resign for a year, and then go ahead and run for mayor term. They could actually get it at least 15 years without any break in service. And I can tell you that's not what was intended back when we discussed this. We were trying to limit it to 12 years just to get some new blood into the council and some new fresh ideas and things like that. So, but I'm amenable to whatever the committee thinks.
All right.
Well, if
Mr.
the
Guzman, did you have
consensus is-
something?
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Mallory?
Mr. Mayor,
Oh,
thank you.
sorry. Go ahead.
If I'm understanding this correctly, if we continue to go down the initial term we're talking about 1 year, if I understand correctly, and using Councilman Shelley as an example, if he wanted to run for mayor in 21, he would resign his seat in August. And let's say we use 366 days to avoid, a special election. He would resign in August, but he doesn't physically get out of the seat until November. Am I understanding that correctly?
No. What my example meant is that, and again, using Mr. Shelley as an example, who will be term limited at November of 21. Under my scenario, in order for him to be able to run for mayor, he would have to walk away completely from the seat by this August. And August being geared to the qualifying date rather than the election date, but being geared to the qualifying date. So really you're having a gap of maybe 14 or 15 months out of office before you potentially take office, in my example. No, this is not a resign to run scenario where you submit it effective in the future and get to stay there. That's not the issue that we're addressing.
Okay, so as we make progress towards this decision, Mr. Moss was referencing, the charter review in the past, that it was a hard 2 years, and now we have 1 year prior. We're starting to get somewhere, and I'm leaning more towards 15 months, the scenario that you initially started with, as long as we don't have to have a special election for the vacant council seat. So I'm kind of leaning in that direction at the moment. I'd like to hear what my other colleagues have to say.
You know, let's address the special election issue. Since our elections are in odd numbered years, and again, let's go back to the real world Shelley example. It's easier when we have real facts rather than hypotheticals. If Shelley were to resign this August in order to run for mayor next November, we could potentially piggyback a special election to fill his seat temporarily on the November national ballot. So it's not as if we would be footing the bill for a standalone special election. See, gearing it to August ensures that if somebody were going to do that, would ensure that the special election could be held in the regular even year November race.
So then you'd like to have language that says if it's on an election year, an even numbered year, it could be up to a year. If it's not on an even numbered year, it has to be prior to avoid a special election?
No, but by necessity, our elections are always in odd numbered years. So if you have to resign 15 months ahead of time, there's always going to be a county or state or national election within a few months of the cutoff date of the resignation.
So then there's no need to worry about.
I don't think we need to go there. Correct. I would like to see us find a mechanism to move away from the 11th hour resignation. As I said earlier, the form over substance. And yes, clearly, I agree with Mr. Moss. The tenor of the discussion was a hard 2 years, okay? But now we're dealing with someone who's in office and who's going to be out. 15 months is a long time to be out of office. You're out of the loop, and I think that from where I sit, in order to fix the issue that I think we have now, that balance between a minimum of 15 months and 2 years is probably a pretty good compromise, because the alternative now is that it could be as little as a 90-day break.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Craig.
Well, I would prefer a hard 2 years in concert with Mr. Maes. And I'm sure that Mr. Pearl could devise some definitive language to close the loophole that you've pointed out. I would be acceptable. I could agree to this 15 months, although I would much rather prefer a hard 2 years.
So
And that would be from that would be from the time that the council person, physically was no longer in the seat. Not from when he sent a letter intended to resign, but from 2 years from the time that the person does not physically occupy the seat till the time that he or she can be elected as another position.
That's correct. Under the scenario and time frame we're talking about, a person would be physically out of the seat from August of 20 till November of 21. So why don't we do this, if it's the pleasure of the committee? Under that philosophy, why don't we have Mr. Pearl take the week and kind of think through what other issues may come to the fore as a result of this scenario, and come back and advise us on that, but we leave here in agreement that we don't want someone to use the resign at the 11th hour loophole that I believe exists at this point, and provide that, someone who is in their last term would need to leave office no later than 1 year prior to the first day of qualification in order to be qualified to switch positions, whether it be council to mayor or mayor to council. Are we good with that philosophy?
I'm
Are we-
agreeable with that. I would just like to make sure that Matt puts as much time as possible between it not being in place and being elected to the next position without any conflicting circumstances.
Well, I think what I can do is provide examples of how things would play out with different time frames, what the implications of that would be with respect to special elections or appointments, and then let the committee decide which of those scenarios is preferable, if that's what you want. We can start with a year minimum. We can look at what 2 years looks like. If we're going with 2 years, the implication might be that somebody would do what we addressed at the first part of this meeting, which would be resign at that point and run for mayor, forego the last 2 years of their term and run for mayor in lieu of the last 2 years of their term. So I think if you stretch to 2 years, that's the more likely scenario. But I'm happy to map out each of these for you so that you can look at the real world implications as we go.
All right.
I've
So,
always said I have great faith in Mr. Pearl's expertise.
Mayor,
yes.
I'll just say my throw my 2 cents into this. I'm always broken where, and we're going to be dealing with this now, as in the county, and we've been dealing with this in up in the Florida legislature. I'll be honest, with term limits, it's definitely it's a good and bad thing, is what I always say. It's good because, we don't get those lifelong politicians that when they know that they're, as incumbents, they could, as an incumbent, and I could take about the district that I'm running into now, right? And someone's been there for 30 years, and we know that people get comfortable. And so, that's the bad part. When people get comfortable and they're not effective in their community anymore, they're just kind of riding it. Doing enough just to until they when it comes to close to election time where they got to start making the donuts again, and so that's the bad part. The good part about experience is that if you do have an effective leader, they will continue to be effective and creating the results that we need as a city. So I'm torn. I'm torn. Look, I could run now for District 9 because of term limits, so I'm grateful for the opportunity. It's an 8-year term. My preferred number is a 12-year overall, whether it's mayor, whether it's council, whether it's a commission. I think 12 is the magic number because look what we did in 10 years. I was there for 10 years on the city council. We got in 2009. And, within that time, a lot did happen. I feel like we've got a lot done within that time as a council, whether you agree or disagree. But definitely felt good in the sense that, hey, we made some progress in 10 years. And so that window from 8 to 12 years, I think is an effective term limits. But for the lifelongers, past, 15, 20 years, sitting up to 30 years and not having term limits, so I am for term limits, more of a, but within the range of 10, if it would be me, 12 is the perfect number. Because if you're not effective, then, the ballot could fix that. And so, as for us right now, again, if let's say I was going into my last term, let's say let's use our scenario right now. If I would have still been there, Shelley and myself would have been the senior members there, and I felt like I could continue to be an effective leader in the community. And if we knew that we had a certain time that we'd have to resign in order to run, I would be okay with that to happen, because like you say in the ballot, if you resign, if you give the year to resign, right, then we're at least being fair in the sense that he's not abusing his position to raise money, right? That would be the reason that you don't want the person in there. And I think that's the flaw in the system that we have now, that if you're sitting in there, you could continue to, you kind of use your position in order to raise money. So I think if we do the year thing, that solves that problem. But it gives the opportunity for someone to continue to, to do well or to get in the system. Now, I think if I look at if I finish, I understand the 12 years and you resign, so you have a 2-year break, because I think the intent of that was that, if I ran, you don't want to run 12 years, finish your term, and then try to run for council again, and get another 12 years. I think that's the 2-year break for council, as well as mayor. If you were a mayor for 8 years, you give yourself, there's a 2-year break in your position. Then if you want to run for mayor again, or for council, then you could do that when you take the 2-year break. And I think that happens when you finish. Like, so if I finish the way I see it is, if I run my full 12 years, then definitely the 2-year break should take effect, right? Because I would have milked or used or done the whole life of the seat. So the idea that, I run my 12 years, I finish in November, and then I think the idea is that I don't get to, the next year, right, coming up, I get to jump back into the race and have an advantage as a past incumbent. So the 2-year break, I think, solves that problem.
And we have that now.
Right, exactly. And I'm okay with that. Now, I'm okay with, how long can you continue to run? Well, I guess, I don't know how, I guess that's one of the things that we need to answer. What's going to be, do we have to, is the break intended for a certain purpose? Like, what was that break for? I mean, if you're an effective leader and you're doing good and you get to run and the people will vote for you, I would think that's a good thing. And so, I just, like I said, just wanted to share some of my thoughts. So that's kind of where I'm at on this matter. I think that if I'm a council member and I wanted to run for mayor in the next election cycle, and I knew that, I would be okay with with the opportunity to resign and be able to run in that upcoming election, because then I wouldn't be up there using my position to raise money. I would have to do it on my own. And I can tell you that once you're not on that seat, the people are going to treat you just like a regular Joe Schmo, and I'm okay with that. And I'm telling you that, from experience now. I'm out there trying to raise money, and it's not the same as you're an incumbent. But that's fine. I speak about my experience, and that's what kind of seals the deal for me. So if we did the year and allowed someone to run, I'm okay with that. I wouldn't want to drive a wedge and say, "Oh, you can't do it." And I think that the people would be able to vote on that. I think that's the kind of the fairness of that process. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with this. Just again, just want to share my thoughts on that.
All right, thank you, Councilman. So, as I outlined earlier, are we all comfortable with Mr. Pearl coming back and kind of sketching out some scenarios so we can think through them and pick the option that causes, you know, what the vote that the committee feels is the least complex, but to address this issue of not being able to stay until almost the very end of your term and then run for a different seat. Is that the will of the committee?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's my will of the committee. That's my will.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mallory, I think you tried to chime in a while ago. Is there something else that you'd like to add to the conversation? I apologize.
Not a problem there. I was agreeing to the, waiting for me to come back and draft the language.
Okay. Well, thank you. So, Matt, I think you know where the committee is coming from and kind of sketch it out and see what would be the path of least resistance to solve that issue.
I think so. I want to clarify because forgive me, there were a few things that were interwoven. There was also discussion as to capping just 12 years of total consecutive service. But I didn't hear anybody come in for a landing on this. Is that something that we're trying to address or not?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I heard discussion about 12 years of maximum service combined as well. Is that something that we want to work in as part of it or not? I didn't hear a definitive direction on that.
You mean under any combination, a maximum of 12?
Yes.
Well, that would kind of wipe out the whole conversation we just.
I know, but there was discussion of that, and I didn't know if that was a scenario that you would also want contemplated.
Any comments?
That's not what I was under the impression of. I was thinking you take the year off prior to qualifying, you sit out of the seat for the year, and then if you happen to become elected for mayor or council, then that specific seat's term starts over.
Well,
We're talking
but I
about a
think what.
maximum of 12 consecutive years.
But I think what Matt is asking, and let's use Mr. Roth as a real world example. If Mr. Roth came to qualifying time next August and decided that he wanted to run for mayor and complied with the resign to run laws and everything else, and was elected mayor, I think what Matt is asking is that would he, in that example, only be limited to serving a total of 4 years as mayor before he has to sit out for a while because he already did 8 on council, and then let's say he's elected for 2 2-year terms or 1 4-year term. Are we also talking about a total of a 12-year limit without any break? Because what we've just talked about is if you are in your last term, the Shelley example where you're in the last term. So I think what Mr. Pearl's asking, okay, let's take the Roth example. Are we going to limit the Roth example to a maximum of 12 years, even though 8 would be as council member and 4 would be as mayor? And I'll speak for myself and I'll let Mr. Moss chime in. I really think that's what was intended 18 years ago, is that whatever combination you wanted to do, it was a 12-year limit at any one given time.
That's correct. And if you look at the minutes.
Hit your button, hit the red light on.
If you look at the minutes from back then, I think Mr. Weiss stated it fairly well where he said that the motion is that a person may serve no more than 12 consecutive years as a councilman. A person may serve no more than 8 consecutive years as a mayor, because that was the 2-year term. And if you have served 12 years as a councilman, you may not run for mayor without a 2-year break in service. If you've served 8 years consecutively as mayor, you may not run for council without a 2-year break in service. And then they mention a maximum of 20 years if you took the 2-year break and go in there. And I recall that the majority basically wanted a 12-year hard cap, no matter how you mixed it up. If you did mayor for 2-year terms and then council for 2 4-year terms, that was your 12 years. And you had to take a 2-year break before you ran for either of those 2 offices.
So,
That was my reading of those minutes from that review committee, and I totally agree with it and completely support it.
I agree with those minutes. That sounds like a better deal than trying to define all these different categories.
Mr. Mayor, in your example using Councilman Roth, if he were to be elected to mayor for a consecutive 8 years, that would total 16?
that's correct. In the Roth example, as I think the charter exists now, at the end of his 8th year on council, he could be, under the current framework, elected for 8 years as mayor and serve, a total of 16. So that is what this current conversation would address, that if he's not up against his term limits as a council member, he's going to be limited to serving 4 years as mayor if he were to abandon, and I don't mean this in a bad way, abandon the council seat next election season and run for mayor and prevail. Under the conversation we're having, he would only be allowed to be mayor for 4 rather than the full 8. So the question is that something that we also want to address?
Yes,
So for the council members leaving their seat prior to their final term, combined has to be 12. If they did decide to leave or resign on their final term, then they could fulfill the full term of the seat they've been elected to.
Right. If
I'm not sure I understand.
restate that
If
if you would, Julio.
If I were to rephrase that, if in my second term of being council, I wanted to then resign to become mayor, then if I had served 8 years and I get elected to be mayor, even resigning and I get elected to be mayor, then I could only serve 1 4-year term of mayor. And on the flip side of that, if you decided to wait out to your term limit, and then you decided to resign to run for mayor, and you get elected, then you could be there for 8 years.
That's
what I'm understanding.
That's true under the totality of the conversations we've had tonight, that if you decide to run for mayor at the end of your second council term, the question becomes, are you limited to only 4 years to do the hard 12 versus only staying out a year, the last 15 months of your final year under term limits as council, and then you get to reset your clock and do a whole 8 years as mayor. That there is a conflict there, but I think the goal is to try to wipe out this theory of the midnight resignation at the end of your term, basically, to run for mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I think that the 12-year hard term should still stay in place regardless of whether you're jumping from council to mayor or mayor to council. once you've served that 12 years, you're done until you sit out for 2 years, and then you can run again.
Well,
And you can
and-
start over again.
And that's the issue. And even though it may have been
It's not in
intended,
place currently.
the charter is not currently written. It's written 12 as council and 8 as mayor. It doesn't address combination. So I guess that's the question before us. Do we want to address that combination?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
as usual, Mr. Mays has put it in very succinct terms. I think the pivotal word is consecutive, that no matter what combination, mayor, council, mayor, that no one should be allowed to serve more than 12 consecutive years.
I agree, except that we are going to define consecutive by requiring that 15-month stepping away potentially. Because, again, if you take the term consecutive at its, street definition, we get back into the land of the midnight resignation to avoid meeting that consecutive definition.
How about the term unbroken?
Pardon?
How about the term unbroken? You can serve no more than 12 unbroken years.
But you're breaking. If
You are breaking it.
I'm at 11 years and 10 months on council and I resign and step away to run for mayor, I get to reset my clock and get almost 20 years when the intention was really, I believe, 12.
If you step away for 2 years,
Okay.
that's okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I think that in other areas, we have this unique language with respect to years. The way that it is simply addressed in other jurisdictions would be where they serve terms. Once you've been elected to serve a term, if you serve any portion of it, you are deemed to have served the entirety. So you couldn't effectuate a break in service. And that, it's cleaner.
Did we lose you, Matt?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, so then the discussion is we utilize new terms to clarify that issue.
We could.
We express things in terms rather than years.
But what that would do, the implications of that, because nothing is simple, would mean that if somebody wanted to resign during their last term of office, and it gets actually more complicated if the 4-year term is applied, because it eliminates the ability of a council member in their last term to resign and run for mayor, really at all. For 2 reasons. One, because if the 4-year term is adopted, you would be exceeding the 12 years of total service. If you tried to resign halfway through your final council term and run for mayor, you would be prohibited from doing that because you would be exceeding the 12-year total.
Good point.
Which is fine if that's what you guys want. I just want everybody to understand the implications. Nothing happens in a vacuum.
No, I understand that, but we've also I'm concerned that we come up with something that corrects what I think we all see as a problem, but that can pass muster at council and to the voters as well.
That's totally fair. I'm just, trying to point out options.
Well, let's do this then. Let's sketch out some options and
Sure.
and come back Monday and over the weekend we'll have those options to kind of digest and and go through this. But I get the feel that we all believe there is a problem of some sort. It's just a matter of how are we going to correct that problem without creating new issues that aren't overwhelming.
And that was it. I'm sorry, Mayor.
No, go ahead.
I was going to respectfully ask that if we want this for the next meeting, we print the agenda. I should have had it to Liz already. Is it possible that we meet maybe Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, so I have time to prepare this?
On Tuesday, we have a cow in a CRA meeting, Matt.
Okay, so maybe,
Well, so maybe
if we want the full thing,
we want to put it off. Can we put it off until a week from today then? I keep forgetting today's Thursday already. I'm thinking we're in a Monday meeting. So Monday doesn't
so did
work.
I.
So are you available Thursday?
Of course.
Okay. So let's set it for next Thursday. I see Mr. Moss is checking his calendar. We'll have everybody else check their calendars. All right. I kind of hate to do this, but given the complexity of this, would it be easier if we went to the following Monday? I mean, there's a lot to.
Certainly, it would give me a little more time to prepare, so I'll take whatever time you're willing to give me.
Do we want to come back next Thursday, committee? Okay, let's, we're good with Thursday? Is anybody not good with Thursday? All right, so let's tentatively set the next meeting for a week from today, which would be the 11th at 5:30 to address Mr. Pearl's work. And we've got plenty of room in here, and quite frankly, if most of you all could be here, I think it would be a much easier and more productive conversation. If not, I fully understand, but we have a lot of room here in this big empty chamber right now to bring the rest of us in next week. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move it.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Vice Chairman Moss, seconded by Councilman Guzman. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here.